Restraint in the eye is good. Restraint in the ear is good. Restraint in the nose is good. Restraint in the tongue is good. Restraint in the body is good. Restraint in the speech is good. Restraint in the mind is good. Restraint in all things is good. A bhikkhu restrained in all ways is freed from all suffering. He who controls his hand, his feet, his speech, he who is well controlled, who is happy with his inward development, who keeps to himself and is content with his solitary life, him I call a bhikkhu. Pleasing is the teaching of that bhikkhu who is moderate in his speech, who explains both the letter and the spirit of the Dhamma without being puffed up. The bhikkhu who abides in the Dhamma, who delights in the Dhamma, who meditates on the Dhamma, who remembers well the Dhamma, he does not fall far from the Dhamma. Let one not scorn what one has received. Let one not envy others. A bhikkhu who envies the gains of others will not attain absorption in meditation. Even if he gets next to nothing, he doesn't treat his gains with scorn. Living purely and untiring, he receives the praise of the gods. He who has no attachment with his name and form, to his mind and body, and who does not grieve for what he does not possess, he is a true bhikkhu. He who practices metta and compassion, and who is deeply devoted to the teaching of the Buddha, attains the Nibbanic peace. Empty the boat, O bhikkhu. It will sail lightly when emptied. Unburden yourself from lust and ill will. You will sail lightly and reach nirvana. Cut off the five, abandon the five, cultivate the five. The bhikkhu who has overcome the five is called one who has crossed the flood. Meditate, O bhikkhu. Do not be heedless. Let not your mind be entangled in sensual strands. Otherwise you will have to swallow the red-hot iron ball and cry in burning pain. This is suffering. Without insight, there is no meditative concentration, and without meditative concentration, there is no insight. With both insight and meditative concentration, one approaches nirvana. Super delightful is that bhikkhu who has a calm mind, who comprehends the Dhamma with insight when he comes to his solitary abode. He is full of joy and happiness whenever he sees the arising and passing of the aggregates, the origin and destruction of the personal self. To the wise one, this reflects the deathless. Control of the senses, contentment, discipline according to the code of monastic discipline. This is the beginning for a wise bhikkhu. Let him be cordial, kindly and refined in conduct, noble, energetic and pure in life. He will end his suffering. Shed passion and aversion, O bhikkhus, as the jasmine sheds its withered flowers. Calm in body, calm in speech, calm in mind, well composed, who has vomited out the baits of the world, he is called serene. Censure yourself by self, scrutinize yourself by self. Thus the self-guarded and mindful bhikkhu will live happily. Self is the lord of self. Self is the guide of self. Therefore control yourself, even as the trader controls a fine horse. That bhikkhu with manifold joy and with full faith in the teachings of the Buddha attains the peaceful state where all the conditioned things have dissolved. A young bhikkhu who strives in the teachings of the Buddha illuminates this world like the moon freed from the clouds. O Brahmana, exert yourself, dam the stream of craving, expel sense desires. Understanding how things get dissolved and disintegrated, you will realize the uncreate. When the Brahmana has sailed to the other shore by meditation and insight, he will know the truth and all his fetters fall away. He for whom there is neither this shore nor the other shore, who is fearless and unfettered, him I call a Brahmana. Sitting silent, absorbed in meditation, affluence gone, whose work is done and who has attained the highest goal, him I call a Brahmana. The sun shines by day, the moon shines by the night, the warrior shines in his armor, the Brahmana shines in his meditation, the Buddha shines all day and all night, every day and every night. Because he has banished the sin, he is called a Brahmana. Because he is serene in his conduct, he is called a Samana. Because he has forsaken his own impurities, he is called Pabbajita. None should strike a Brahmana, and a Brahmana when struck should not retaliate. Shame to him who strikes a Brahmana, more shame to the Brahmana if he gives way to anger. Nothing is better for a Brahmana when he holds back from the endearments of life. To the extent the will to harm others ceases, to that extent the suffering subsides. He who is controlled in the deeds of the body, speech and mind, who is controlled in these three ways, him I called a Brahmana. Just as a Brahmin priest reveres the sacrificial fire, so should one revere him who understands the Dhamma taught by the Buddha. Not by matted hair, not by clan, not by birth does one become a Brahmana. By truth, purity and righteousness, one becomes a Brahmana. What is the use of your matted hair, O fool? Why do you wear the deer skin? On the outside you clean yourself, inside of you is ravening. He who meditates alone in the forest, who wears robes of rags, who is lean with veins showing all over his body, him I call a Brahmana. I do not call one a Brahmana for being born of a mother or sprung from a womb, but he who has nothing, who clings to nothing, he is a Brahmana. Him I call a Brahmana, who has cut all fetters, who doesn't get ruffled, who is unshackled and liberated. Him I call a Brahmana, who has cut the thongs, bands, ropes and appurtenances of hatred, craving, heresies and latent evil tendencies, who has burst the crossbar of ignorance and who is enlightened. He who without resentment endures abuse, beating and punishment, whose real power is patience, him I call a Brahmana. Free from anger, observing duties, principled, controlled and without craving, wearing his last body, him I call a Brahmana. When his desires roll off like water from a lotus leaf or mustard seed on the point of a needle, him I call a Brahmana. Him I call a Brahmana, who in this very life knows the end of his suffering, who is unshackled and has laid aside his burden. He who has profound discernment, who distinctly knows the right from wrong, who has attained the highest goal, him I call a Brahmana. Him I call a Brahmana, who is aloof with householders and monks alike, who wanders about with no fixed homes and who has no wants. Him I call a Brahmana, who put away the rod of punishment for all living creatures, weak or strong, who neither kills nor causes others to kill. Him I call a Brahmana, who is friendly amidst the hostile, peaceful among the violent, unattached among the attached. Him I call a Brahmana, from whom lust and hypocrisy, pride and hatred fall away like a mustard seed from the point of a needle. Him I call a Brahmana, whose words are truthful, gentle, instructive and abuses no one. He who in this world takes nothing that is not given to him, be it long or short, small or large, attractive or not, him I call a true Brahmana. Him I call a Brahmana, who has no desires of this world or the next, who is desire-free and emancipated. Him I call a Brahmana, who has no attachments, who has destroyed his doubts by perfect knowledge, and has plunged into the deathless. Him I call a Brahmana, who here has transcended the ties of both merit and demerit, who is sorrowless, dustless, and pure. Him I call a Brahmana who, like the moon, is spotless, pure, serene, and clear, and who has destroyed the desire in existence. Having gone beyond the muddy road of samsara and delusion, who has reached the other shore, absorbed in meditation, calm, free from want, from perplexity, without attachment, fully content, him I call a Brahmana. Him I call a Brahmana who, in this world, having abandoned sensual pleasures, wanders without a home, and all the desire for existence is gone. Him I call a Brahmana who, in this world, having abandoned craving, wanders without a home, has destroyed both craving and continued existence. Him I call a Brahmana who has cut off the attachment to human things and has also made his way past the heavenly things. Him I call a Brahmana who is done with delight and displeasure, who is calm, who is rid of the substrata of existence, who is like the hero who has conquered the worlds. Him I call a Brahmana who, in every way, knows the mystery of arising and passing of all beings, who is totally detached, blessed, and enlightened. Him I call a Brahmana whose track no gods, no angels, and no humans can trace, and whose depravities are destroyed. Him I call a Brahmana who clings not to the past, the present, and the future, who holds nothing and is detached. He, the noble, the excellent, the heroic, the great sage, the conqueror, the passionless, the pure, the enlightened one, him do I call a Brahmana. He who knows his former lives, who knows heaven and hell, who has reached the end of births, who has attained the perfection of insight, who has reached the summit of spiritual excellence, him I call a true Brahmana.